Well, I'm going to shift from posterizing Louis Menand in his book, The Free World, Art and Thought in the Cold War, and turn to posterizing some of the critics who have praised it. Um, One thing I want to say is having lived sort of on the outskirts of maybe the high end literary world in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was partnered up with an author in that world, or at least again on the outskirts of that world, or in that world, uh, and having spent, more or less a lifetime in academia, I've reached the considered opinion that status is the only thing that matters, basically. Okay? No, I mean, I don't think that people are responding to the quality of the work in either of these domains. For example, literary fiction. I mean, in a way, literary fiction is disintegrated, but it's maybe not uh, as worth getting worried about the pseudo meritocracy. Um, and in academia, man, people respond to your position a lot more. I mean, to your academic position a lot more than your intellectual position or abilities. And one result of this in both worlds is just suck ass writing. Okay, like and people are not able to write very well, even at the highest end of these things, really. And people are not able to recognize good writing. All they recognize is the name of your academic position, like Louis Menand, multiple endowed chair at Harvard. He can't possibly suck. So you don't believe your eyes as you read it. You never see it. Because if you did, I take myself to have refuted this book in the previous video, okay? And also in print, by quoting like 300 sentences from it, which are just execrable. You don't even see it because all you see is the status. It's New Yorker staff writer. That is quality. That is literary quality. And I'll just say, like, for, 30, 40 years, uh, the New Yorker sucks, dude. Okay. I mean, the politics are just the most unanimous, banal bullshit you ever saw. You don't have to read it because you already know what it's going to say. The pseudo quality of a lot of the quality stuff. I mean, I guess I don't respond to quote unquote literary fiction very much, but a lot of mediocre bullshit by prestigious people with good agents. Okay, agents that know the editors from the parties. Right? I mean, that's what this shit is about. Who is whose agent? Who is whose editor? Okay. Who is whose publisher? Who's going to whose parties? Who's kissing up to him? And everyone's kissing up to you if you're the ex-professor at Harvard, New Yorker staff writer. I mean, I'm not saying that no one who writes for the New Yorker, a lot of these people are really good writers, actually. But you don't even notice that Louis Menand is definitely not. Okay. And I mean, another angle on this I just want to take for a second is a lot of the pieces about this book start out in a nostalgic, mournful frame of mind for when ideas mattered, and novels mattered, and essays mattered, and intellectual histories mattered. And I had quite the same response. Okay, like if you had put out a book at this level in '75, That's when, like, say, Jacques Barzun, never tried to pronounce that before, maybe, rarely, was writing this kind of thing, compendious intellectual histories. He was such an elegant, fine stylist. Okay, this crap is unbelievable. Like I say, I think I've done this royally already, and also uh, the um, the level of historical like interpretation, like the structure for understanding why history is unfolding, is just amazingly poor. I guess I mean change was in the air is as good as it gets, I guess. Racism didn't disappear after 1945. Here's this. Okay, I'll just say, like, if you're endorsing this book, you're endorsing this sentence because this is the spirit of the whole book. Prose-wise and historical explanation-wise, it was one of those moments when the universe was poised to plunge down a different path. Okay. So I'll just quote a few of the emerging reviews. Let me say, like, people are showing some reservations. Thank God. I mean, really what you do here, if you have enough self-awareness and awareness of what writing is, to think, like, there are problems with this book, you start out by praising it to the skies. And you go, well, there are a couple problems here. Like, it's totally incoherent. It doesn't give any overall interpretation at all. It introduces you to a cast of thousands and does almost nothing with any of them, etc. You go like, so why'd you start out by saying things like, the even-handed approach of Louis Menand, who won a Pulitzer Prize for the Metaphysical Club, like, you'll just stack up the qualifications, is like a breath of fresh air. The free world sparkles. This is David Oshinsky in one of the most kiss-up reviews you can imagine in the New York Times, a professor of history, okay, at NYU. Kind of doing the thing you do before the alpha dog. Fully original. Beautifully written. It covers the interchange of arts and ideas between the United States and Europe in the decades following World War II. Beautifully written. Quote, a few years after leaving the party in a farmhouse in Vermont, he began writing Invisible Man. Unquote. Many grammatically garbled sentences like that in a Farrar Straus Giroux book by a Harvard professor who writes for the New Yorker. You don't even see it, right? If you think that this is fully original, you haven't read any history of this period. It's completely reprocessed cliches. Beautifully written. Okay, I've shown that to be false, right? So what does this say about Oshinsky? I don't know. What does it say about, like, the American history establishment? Okay, how about this? Menand's description of Bonnie and Clyde is a masterpiece of storytelling. Okay, so I guess I challenge you to read that masterpiece of storytelling. It starts on page 666, at least of my publisher proof. I mean, it goes along on these lines. The option did expire, and the man who picked it up was Warren Beatty. Beatty had made a movie with Arthur Penn in 1965. Just the amazing staticness of this writing. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like, A typical sentence of this book is, he was Frank Wisner. Beatty had made a movie with Arthur Penn in 1965, Mickey 1, a noirish picture in which he had been somewhat miscast as a stand-up comic, and he approached Penn to direct. Penn was a sophisticated theater person. That's the typical crisp biographical characterization that so many critics have praised. Arthur Penn was a sophisticated theater person. That's pretty much all you get. The treatment of Bonnie and Clyde it's quite typical of the whole book. It runs you through a couple dozen names for no apparent reason whatsoever. Gives you like extraneous details again about the options on the contract and stuff. And then it moves on to Pauline Kael, who he says entered the arena with a splash because Bonnie and Clyde had saved Pauline Kael. If you think that this is some kind of masterpiece of narrative, it's not even a coherent narrative, dude. And another effect of this thing is, Bonnie and Clyde gets about the same run as the Vietnam War in this history. Okay. Even Oshinsky says, hundreds of names are mentioned, and I don't really know by the end, but then it sparkles, fully original. Edward Rothstein in the Wall Street Journal gives a good example of someone who is perfectly capable of saying how bad this book sucks. Okay. But can't make himself say it. See, the problem is, if you attack someone who has this much prestige, you're showing that you don't understand. You're discrediting yourself, even if you're obviously right. It's hilarious, man. This is why the most prestigious prize-winning stuff in our culture is often the really worst stuff, and everyone's just kind of patting each other on the back, The bloated, bullshitty stuff. The stuff that's got nothing going except that it's got a good agent, But anyway, so Edward Rothstein says, this epic book, at once brilliant and exasperating, illuminating and confounding, absorbing and off-putting, is his attempt to examine what happened and to explain why, by the end of the Vietnam War, America was a very different country than the one that had led the free world just after 1945. Maybe I should have skipped that one. He knows what he's reading, but he won't say it, I think. Carlos Lozada, Louis Menand, is a chronicler of the American mind. It is an engrossing and impossibly wide-ranging project, as idiosyncratic as it is systematic. It doesn't show any idiosyncratic, interesting, eccentric interpretation of the material. It's lockstep conventional. It's idiosyncratic in that it piles up details randomly, I guess, written by an author, confident that the things that interest him will interest his readers too, and he's right. The Free World, this is Carlos Lozada in the Post. The Free World is lengthy, 857 pages, does require some commitment from both reader and writer, yet I was sad to reach the end. Even Menand's footnotes are delightful. They're not really. It is a book that compels you to buy other ones. Sontag's Against Interpretation and Other Essays now sits on my shelf, sits on the shelf of my writing desk. Sontag is as central as anyone to this, and she's kind of an emblematic figure in his picture of the wonder of post-war intellectual, Cold War intellectual life or whatever. In one of the central skirmishes in Sontag's career, She wrote about Leni Riefenstahl. Menand gets her completely, obviously wrong. Right now, I'm not just whining about the writing. This is the kind of mistake. All right. He makes her into a formalist with like Clement Greenberg style aesthetics. It doesn't matter what the content is. Only all that matters is the aesthetic form. According to Menand, according to Sontag. Sontag's promotion of the aesthetic, this is on page 592 of The Free World, in my published proof anyway. Sontag's promotion of the aesthetic may have seemed dangerous to writers like Irving Howe, who saw literature as a site of moral instruction. But there was nothing radical about it. She was using the term as it was used when it was first applied to the arts in the 18th century. An aesthetic appreciation precisely allows you to bracket content. In 18th century Britain, this might be Catholic iconography. For Sontag, it turned out to be Nazi ideology. So the idea is that you can appreciate Sontag as a great artist. Sontag appreciates Riefenstahl as a great artist and blinks the Nazi content completely. How radical was this? Not as radical as it appears. There have been a lot of estheticians before that, like, no shit. Her remarks about Riefenstahl duplicate the argument for awarding Ezra Pound, the fascist, the Bowling Prize for the Pisan cantos. Greenberg's art criticism is pure formalism. Meyer Shapiro argues for a version of formalism. And so he says she just excuses Riefenstahl's Nazism on the basis of the greatness of her aesthetic. All right, so I'm just going to read a couple of passages from Sontag's essay, Fascinating Fascism, about Riefenstahl. Admittedly, if the book were not signed by Riefenstahl, this is her book, The Last of the Nuba, where she was photographing African wrestlers and beauty queens, I guess, in this African tribe. And beautiful people, beautiful bodies. And Riefenstahl was trying to maybe give an anti-racist message in the sense that talking about the beauty of black people might relieve her of the accusation of being a Nazi. Perhaps. But Sontag's view is it doesn't at all. Her photography of the Nuba is Nazi art. Is fascist art, says Sontag, and she blows it up on that basis. Most people who leaf through The Last of the Nuba will probably see it as one more lament for vanishing primitives. The greatest example remains Levi-Strauss in Tristes Tropiques on the Bororo Indians in Brazil. But if the photographs are examined carefully, in conjunction with the lengthy text written by Riefenstahl, it becomes clear that they are continuous with her Nazi work. Riefenstahl's particular slant is revealed by her choice of this tribe and not another, a people she describes as acutely artistic. Everyone owns a lyre, L-Y-R-E, and beautiful Nuba men, Riefenstahl notes, have an athletic build rare in any other African tribe. Endowed as they are with a much stronger sense of spiritual and religious relations than of worldly and material matters. That's a quote from Riefenstahl. All four of Riefenstahl's commissioned Nazi films, whether about party congresses, the Wehrmacht, or athletes, celebrates the rebirth of the body and of community mediated through the worship of an irresistible leader. They follow directly from the films of Fanck, in which she starred, and her own The Blue Light, her mountain films. The Alpine fictions are tales of longing for high places and the challenge and ordeal of the elemental, the primitive. They are about the vertigo before power, symbolized by the majesty and beauty of mountains. The Nazi films are epics of achieved community, in which everyday reality is transcended through ecstatic self-control and submission. They are about the triumph of power. And The Last of the Nuba, an elegy for the soon-to-be extinguished beauty and mystic powers of primitives whom Riefenstahl calls her adopted people, is the third in her triptych of fascist visuals. It's a completely anti-aestheticist interpretation and a complete condemnation of Riefenstahl, and he's just got it utterly backwards, and this is one of the central figures that he's trying to associate with the whole Cold War. There are many other mistakes like that, if you ask me. Hard not to notice, all right? But at the level of the sentence, or at the level of the overall narrative, it's all in collapse anyway. In this wide-ranging story, says Andy Lewis in the LA Times, he displays a gifted eye for the telling anecdote. The apartment had belonged to a friend, Bill Canastra, who was, and this is all you get, Bill Canastra, the telling anecdote. A friend, Bill Canastra, who was killed by sticking his head out of the window of a moving subway train. It is assumed that Canastra was gay. Joan Haverty was his girlfriend at the time. It is assumed that Canastra was gay. That's the telling, pithy bit of characterization. Okay. And then all these reviews also focus on the way Menand sets up the book, which is, I'm going to be wrestling with the meaning of freedom. Several of these reviews point out that he doesn't do anything with the meaning of freedom. And actually he abandons it as a theme, more or less. It kind of spins back a few times in a superficial way. But The Free World is a very long book, 727 pages plus notes. They're not a dense or difficult one. Menand's style is reliably crisp and lively, and he has a great eye for the incongruous anecdote. Indeed. That's Evan Kindly in the New Republic. Man, this is good stuff. The Free World is an engrossing and often revelatory book, a capacious, ambitious, and wonderfully crafted synthesis of intellectual and cultural history. As a critic himself, Menand boasts a sharp observational wit and a knack for a turn of phrase. The Beats were men who wrote about their feelings, he declares, a pithy but pretty exact description. All right. Now, Jack Hamilton writing in Slate, quoting Carlos Lozada writing in the Washington Post, I propose. Picking out, the Beats were men who wrote about their feelings. They both picked that out from this whole welter of sentences as a particularly, quote, pithy description. What couldn't we sell you if we were staff writers from the New Yorker and Harvard professors Carlos Lozada and Jack Hamilton? And are you really just going to echo each other phrase by phrase, word by word? Turn over the hierarchy, okay? The mediocrity. Read for yourself. See what's in front of your eyes and say what you're seeing. You're a frigging critic, all right? That's what we're frigging paying you for. You later.